Hi, welcome back. I'm glad you joined me today. Today, one of my followers, Brenda, suggested that I go down to the city or the town of Tubac. Tubac. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. That is an artsy, crafty type of a community and could be an interesting place to visit. And so I'm going to go down there today. And last night I'm over at old high school friends of mine, Dave's house, and I'm telling him that I'm going to head down to this town. And he goes, well, there's a really interesting historical park there. It's called the Tubac Presidio State Park. And that area has been a settlement since the 1700s. And so it has a lot, it looks like it has a lot of history. My initial research into the park indicates it's only open from 8 a.m. until noon today. So I need to get my act together and I need to get out of here and get moving. So stay tuned and let's find out what I found out today. Take care.
This adobe structure was most recently used as a tack house to hold equipment related to horses. It began its life as another row house and was in fact where Luisa Rojas was born. The remains of the general utility wagon from the 19th century lies on the floor of the tack house. The row house was built by Ramando and Inez Rojas, members of two pioneer Tubac families in the 1890s. Their daughter, Luisa, was born on the property in 1894 and lived in the house until shortly before her death in 1889. Luis was the caretaker of the 1885 schoolhouse. Luisa was for 30 years. Row houses like these have been used for residences in this area for centuries. They were relatively easy to build and easy to extend and add rooms on as the family grew. Originally, the row house was just a 2 rooms and a fireplace. The kitchen, which we're going to go into now, as we circle around here, was added in the south end in 1908. The floors were originally dirt and mud, but a wooden floor was added in the 1940s. The adobe structure in the yard, again, was an original row house type house. Rojas House is listed on the National Register of Historic Places and is the only surviving Mexican house in Tubac. Arista. The Spanish mined the area for copper and gold, but mainly for silver. An aristra is a primitive but effective system for crushing ore. Heavy, flat-bottomed boulders, like the ones you see here, attached to chains, were dragged over the ore by a horse, mule, or manpower. Over time, the ore was pulverized into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. In case of silver, water and quicksilver, or mercury, were added to the crushed ore, enabling the metal to be separated out. Artisans are still used in remote areas in Mexico for crushing ore and other products. Ortheo Hall's paintings. Around the walls of the gallery are 16 depictions of events in Arizona history, painted for the Arizona Highways magazine in the 1980s. A description of each event is located next to the works. Paintings are very well done. I love the color and I love the realism of it. It's really fantastic. Now, the other thing they have is this wagon. Let's take a look and read about the wagon a little bit. This wagon was actually built in the 1800s. It was restored and modified to replicate the ambulance that Ferocian R. Way, an engraver from Cincinnati, Ohio, rode on from the Rio Grande River to Tucson in June 1858. So we're looking at about as authentic reproduction of this wagon as you can have without actually having the full wagon. Great care was taken, fabulous detail, days and days of work. Molinos, the round grindstones. The variations from stone to stone may be a result of different craftsmanship and designs, or from different grains or coarseness of grains. In Spanish, these were called molinos, and they were used to grind wheat and corn into flour or grist. You can see how this was done by looking at the two stones surrounded by adobe bricks. The stone with the groove design was stationary and placed below the flat stone, which was slightly smaller and rotated on top, pulverizing the corn or wheat. The flour or grist moved to the outer edge of the stone during the grinding process, where it was caught and collected by cloth. This patio area represents different aspects of the Spanish colonial life in the mid to late 1700s. Most homes around Tubac had a kitchen garden, providing the family with fresh vegetables and herbs. Water was diverted from the Santa Cruz River for irrigation by canals. Gardens included corn, wheat, squash, rosemary, onions, garlic, chilies, herbs including cilantro, rosemary, sage, mint, and chicory. The herbs were used for cooking and medicinal purposes. While Europeans brought many new foods to the area, such as wheat, citrus, chickens, sheep, beef, and pork, the Spanish adopted many native foods as well, such as corn, turkey, coca, cactus fruit, squash, chilies, and a wide variety of nuts and beans. Chocolate was an extremely popular beverage in Spanish colonial times. One year, thousands of pounds of chocolate were delivered to the settlement in Tubac, confirming that chocolate was the beverage of choice for the soldiers. Here we have an example of some of the plants that were grown, of course in modern usage, that were grown in the ancient gardens.
You're looking at the Washington hand press. This was the first printing press in Arizona. It came to Tubac January of 1859 from Cincinnati, Ohio. And what it did was it printed the first newspaper in Arizona down here in Tubac. The paper was called the Weekly Arizonian. The first edition came out March 3rd, 1859. And what we're doing here now is we're printing a reproduction of that first newspaper on the original press. The paper was set all by hand set type. They proofed the type, and then they locked it up in the chases you see in front of me. Once the chases were locked up, we would go ahead and spread ink on our ink slab over here, even out the ink that there was no lumps in it. And what I have in my hand is an ink roller, or commonly known as a brayer. We put ink on the brayer, then we ink up our form. We go across one page at a time. Then we put some more ink on the brayer, and we go across in the opposite direction. And the reason we do this is to make sure that all the type is properly inked. Then we'll come around and grab a sheet of paper off the paper bench. We lift up the frisket. We'll put the paper in the frisket. Close the frisket, and then drop it down onto the type. We then roll the bed into the press. We pull the lever, and this forces the paper onto the type. Roll the bed back out. Lift up the frisket and remove the printed paper. You take a look at it, check it that everything was inked properly, and then we go ahead after we're done is lay it on the paper bench for it to dry.
Tubac Museum dates back to 1960, just 2 years after the Tubac Presidio became Arizona's first state park. I have a more detailed video that is attached. The adobe ruins with river stone foundations do not date to the Spanish colonial period. These buildings and another one located elsewhere were built by the Sinhoe family as a store and residence. Other structures were rented to school teachers in the 1920s. Because the adobe buildings were built on top of the Presidio ruins, and were only about 40 years old when the state park was established in 1958. The ruins are not being preserved and are slowly melting back into the ground.
Thanks for watching, and take a little bit of time and check out my other videos on my YouTube page. Take care. May all your seas be calm.